Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. Today we want to recognize that we celebrate the memory of Martin Luther King. There's an intimate relationship between Martin Luther King and the state of Hawaii. Do you realize that in 1959, when we celebrated our statehood, Martin Luther came and spoke to both houses of the state legislature. And in that gathering, he told us that Hawaii is the place where his dream is actually realized. And all of us know that his dream is that America can be a place where people are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. You may recall in some of the black and white photos of the march at Selma, King and his companions wearing flower lei. That was a result of the intimate relationship with Hawaii and the fact that Hawaii stands for racial unity. With that said, let's remember Martin Luther King and let's defend what he stood for. Today we have a very interesting program. The legislature is about to reconvene for 2016, and top of mind for everyone will be the governor's budget. As we look at that budget, we're going to examine very carefully the revenues and the expenses and determine whether we're on track for the kind of prosperity that the citizens of Hawaii deserve. To talk about it today, I'm pleased to have with us Paul Harleman, who happens to be the Senate Budget Director for the minority and has worked very carefully on analyzing the budget and putting together some recommendations. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Always good to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Well, we've also got another dear friend of ours, Joe Kent, who is the Vice President of Research and Development at the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Joe, you do great work. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, let's just start with the real basic question. What in the world is the budget? I know what it is at my house. It's when my wife tells me what I can buy and what I can't buy and whether we can afford it. And if I go out and buy things that aren't in the budget, we end up not being able to afford it. But what is the budget for the state, Paul?
Well, in plain terms, the state operates like any, we have revenues coming in and there's money coming out. So most of our taxes that we pay go into the state budget, and that's how we fund critical things. That's how we pay for, all of our stuff in the state.
So just like a household budget, the budget for the state shows money coming in.
And money going out.
And money going out.
Correct.
Real quick question I have for you about this. Does the money going out always stay within the limits of the money coming in, or do we sometimes spend more than we actually bring in?
Actually, I would say for the last 4 years now, we have been spending more money than that's coming in on an annual basis. And
so just for the non-technical person, how does that make sense?
It doesn't make any sense. That's a big thing. It doesn't make any
some of the hard-hitting analysis that you give as the Senate Minority Budget Director.
Correct. I mean, the budget has to be balanced on an annual basis, and one of the problems that we've been seeing over the last 4 years is that we are spending more money on an annual basis. We are only able to do that because we had a balance in our bank.
But we're spending then sort of from our savings, so
Correct.
to speak.
We're
That's
spending
right.
from our savings, and we can only do that for so long. And one of the things that we did in our budget is we actually looked at the rate of spending over time, and we came up with the fact that, from our standpoint, we don't think that the current budget could be maintained beyond fiscal year 2018.
Now that's a striking statement. In other words, you looked at the monies that the state has access to in various accounts.
Correct.
Some of them are savings, but actually they're not really savings. They're actually dedicated to other expenses. And you saw at the rate at which we are spending down that cash, we're going to be in trouble by fiscal year 2018?
Correct. Starting fiscal year 2018.
Well, that doesn't sound very happy.
That doesn't sound very good.
So we want you to go home and not tell anybody, okay?
Yeah.
Joe, how important is it, and this is something we talk about at the Grassroots Institute, to have an opposing voice? At Grassroots, as you know, being our Vice President of Research and Development, we're not Republicans, we're not Democrats, we're not Libertarians in terms of the political party sense. But we do know we live in a state with a single dominant political party. How important is it to have an alternate voice just in terms of getting information?
Well, how important is it to have an alternate voice in your home budget? When you're spending, if you're the only person with a credit card and you're spending and spending, it is actually
I keep
important to have
voting
someone to have someone else say, "Wait a minute, what are you spending all this money on?" And at the legislature and at the Capitol, we need to have that opposing voice. It's so important. That's why we're so glad that you're here.
It's very important.
Now, what are some of the big items, the big ticket items that we're spending this credit card on?
Well, most of our budget actually is spent on fixed costs. So, for example, we have to pay for our state pensions, we have to pay for health insurance and Medicaid, and we have to pay for debt service.
So, Paul,
And all those things combined account for about half of
Half
the
of
state
our
general,
budget.
No, well, actually half of the state's general fund.
half of our general fund. So let me just kind of take off of what you said, if I understand it correctly. Most of the expenses in our budget are for costs that we've incurred already.
Correct.
Whether it's retirement payment and so forth, or debt servicing.
Correct.
So over half of our budget goes to paying off.
Fixed costs
Fixed
means
costs.
that we can't really change those costs. And a big item, of course, it's the payments for pension and health benefits. I mean, as you know, we have an unfunded liability right now for about $15 billion.
Well, now that's something we're talking about. In other words, a big portion of our budget always goes to paying down this liability we have.
Correct.
For our pensions. Now, there are actually two kinds, aren't there? There are two basic accounts we're looking at. The employee retirement system, a lot of people know about that because
Yeah.
public workers serve their time, they retire, and then they get paid a pension. But there's another fund as well that we have to be concerned about, and that's, could you explain that?
Yeah, that's the EUTF. It stands for Employer Union Trust Fund. And that's for health insurance for current state employees as well as retired state employees.
So let's talk about each of them. In the ERS, the Employee Retirement System, how much is our unfunded liability? How much do we actually owe that we don't have sitting there to pay out yet?
I believe it's about $6.5 billion.
$6.5 billion.
In unfunded liability, and that's for the pensions.
All right.
And that's not money that we have to pay eventually. That's money that's missing today.
Correct. That's money that's missing today, and over a 30-year period, we have to pay an annual payment. And I believe for the employment retirement system, it's about $500 million. That's what we are paying annually. Each year over a 30-year period. And if we continue to make those payments based on the estimates, we are able to pay down that liability.
Okay, now that recently occurred at our state legislature where we adopted the plan for paying down the unfunded liability. And you're saying that over the next 30 years, if we keep paying $500 million per year, we will have paid down the liabilities that we owe to the people who are
but
retirees now, or in the system now.
Correct, but the difference is that also assumes that our money in the trust fund is being invested, and that the rate of return on those investment on average is about 7.75%.
That's the assumption,
That's the
that
main
we're going to get
assumption.
7.75% return. So that's the crystal ball that it was set up with. That's why it looked so feasible.
Correct.
Well, what does your crystal ball tell you, or can we even rely on a crystal ball?
I think that's a fair estimate if we look at average return, average stock market returns over, let's say, a 30 or 40-year period of time. I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Well, good. I want you to be my broker then.
Yeah. I mean, on an average basis.
But it could be less than that, though.
It could be less than that, and if that's the case, then it means that we have to pay more.
And various factors that affect our economy as well as our fiscal health could, in some ways, end up making
more
the return.
Demographic factors.
There you go.
It's more, I mean, the ERS, the employment retirement system, is really based upon demographic factors, as well as the rate of return on the trust fund.
All right,
investments.
okay. So we've been talking about the employee retirement system, and you said that there's about $6 billion of unfunded
6.5.
liability. 6.5 billion. And just to keep up with that, not talking about the future, we have to be paying $500 million a year for the next 30 years. Now let's switch to the other source of unfunded liability. In addition to that 6.5 billion for the ERS, we've got the EUTF. Tell us what that is again, and how much is the unfunded
EUTF
liability?
is the Employer Union Trust Fund, which has health insurance for
Right.
current state employees as well as retired state employees. And that liability is about $8.5 billion. So
$8.5 billion.
Correct. And
so together with the ERS,
it's
we're
about
dealing with
15.
$15 billion
Yeah.
of unfunded liability.
Now that estimate for the unfunded liability for the EUTF is fundamentally different than the ERS, because we, quite frankly, don't know what the cost for health insurance is going to be 30 years from now. So,
You think it'll come down?
well, quite frankly,
So
I have no clue, but
so the actual liability will
Could be
be
much
affected
higher.
by the real costs, and we haven't seen health care come down in
correct.
price.
Actually, quite frankly, the last year, the premiums for both Kaiser and HMSA went up on the business market. I've seen premiums go up by as much as 22%. So it's very important to understand that fundamental difference between the EUTF liability and the ERS, because the current assumption that is used to come up with that $8.5 billion estimate for the EUTF is actually that health costs are estimated to increase on average annually by about 9%.
9%.
Now, what we came up with in our paper that we've published last week, and it's on the Senate minority website, is that if that assumption is changed by 1%,
Right.
for example, so if we change that assumption from 9% to 10%, then our unfunded liability would actually increase by $1.5 billion.
Well, hold that thought, because this is a great place to take a break, realizing that we currently have $15 billion in unfunded liabilities just in these two retirement and health accounts. And there are some unpredictabilities there. I'm talking with Paul Harleman, Senate Minority Budget Director. The question today we're asking is our state budget going to be in good condition in the years to come, or are we going to go bust? We'll take a short break now, but don't go away. Right after this message, we'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Reg Baker, and I'm the host of Business in Hawaii with Reg Baker. Business in Hawaii is a program that is positive stories about business in Hawaii. We're tired of hearing the negativity and why it's the wrong place to have a business. We talk about the positive reasons for having a business in Hawaii and how to be successful. We broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I'd like to bring on guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with Think Tech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako, here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. And I want to say mahalo to Jay Fidel and the wonderful staff and volunteers who make this organization run. Think Tech Hawaii produces about 35 hours of original content dealing with the latest public policy issues from the state of Hawaii. And it's seen all across the world. And we say mahalo, which is thank you to all of you who are watching. We like to say at the Grassroots Institute, Ehana Kako, which means let's work together. Let's work together to build a better economy, government, and society. Well, as we begin the 2016 legislative session, we hope that there'll be a lot of working together, Democrats and Republicans, independents and others, all around finding solutions for our state. Paul Harleman, Director of the Minority Budget, let me ask you this question. How certain, how strong, strongly how certain can we be that our state will continue to pay the $500 million needed to pay down the employee retirement service system unfunded liabilities?
Yeah, well, nothing is certain, although.
Is there a threat
They
of jail
are-
terms if the legislature doesn't do it? I mean,
No, actually, well, they are required, both the city and the state is now required under statute to make those payments. Now, that doesn't
Okay, there's a
limit-
law.
There's a law, but, the legislature could always change law, so if they do, so that there's no guarantees.
You know,
that future.
you and I both know the former governor's budget director. I asked him once on our program, what does it take to make sure that the unfunded liabilities get paid down? And he looked at me and he said, fortitude.
But tell me if I have this right, though. We have to keep making these catch-up payments to help pay off the unfunded liabilities, and this is a bigger and bigger portion of the budget. It's almost
Yeah.
like a cancer on the budget that's growing and growing, and now it's going to start eating up more government services that people love, like schools and police and
Correct.
fire and all that. So it may be that some of this money is eating into some of the services that people depend on.
Well, that's actually happening right now. As I mentioned earlier, we're talking about $1.2 billion that we're spending, and every year right now, and that's about 20% of the state's general fund. Now, most government services and programs are funded by the state general fund. So that's a big chunk of money.
So
And
it's not merely the case that we're ensuring a healthy retirement for our state, our public workers. We're also, with this backlog of debt that we're paying down, taking away from solutions to homelessness or taking
Correct.
away from things that will really help people. I know our school teachers recently in the teachers union proposed an increase of expenditures, and they're trying to find a tax increase for that, but they could easily have had those increases in expenditures if we weren't paying down this debt.
That's yeah. I mean, it pretty much comes down to the fact that 20% of your tax money that you pay, whether it's income taxes, general excise taxes, goes towards that debt. And it doesn't go to, there's many critical areas.
Now, the EUTF, let's take a look at that trust fund that handles the health benefits for our retirees from the state. Does it also have a pay down system like the employee retirement system?
Yes, it's based upon the 30-year payment schedule.
All right, and how much is that per year?
That is about 800 million, about 800
So
a year.
that's even more than the ERS payment,
That's more than the
which is
ERS
$500 million.
Correct, because historically, the state legislature has put some money in the ERS system. But as far as the EUTF, there hasn't been any pre-funding since. I mean, the first time that the state ever put money into that trust fund was about 3 years ago. I
So
believe.
just to catch up for these two funds,
Yeah.
500 million plus 800 million, that's $1.3 billion every year for the next 30 years just to catch up with the unfunded liabilities that are current.
Correct.
That's bigger than the current budget.
Well, actually, the state's general fund is about it's about $6.5 billion.
No, but the yearly budget, though.
Well, that is the yearly budget. So the actual overall state budget is, if you look at all means of financing, it's about 13 billion, but it's a big chunk of money that is really needed in other areas.
So we
in
need
Hawaii,
to
so.
be very cautious about any changes in the economic climate, changes demographically, as well as any temptation by the legislature to change the law mandating the payment down of all these.
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons our bond rating was
The bond rating for the state.
increased, I believe, last year, and one of the reasons was because we have that law in place. So I don't think that that will change.
Okay.
At least in the short term. but there are some needs, and there's actually no money in the budget. And one of the reasons is that we're paying that $1.2 billion every year.
Okay.
So-
Now, let's switch gear here a little bit and look at the actual budget proposal going forward in 2016, heading to the legislature. The governor wants a midterm approval of his budget. What do you see in that budget going forward?
Well, there's not much in the budget, quite frankly, because there is absolutely no money. But because there are a lot of fixed items, the governor's supplemental budget for fiscal year 2017 included about $300 million in extra funds that was already approved last year.
All right.
So most of that is actually to pre-fund the EUTF. And so about let's say 70% of the $300 million is just to pre-fund the EUTF. And there are some other areas in the budget, of course, that there's $25 million for the DOE, and there's some other line items that go up every year. But other than that, there's no big line items in the
How
budget.
about the very standard analysis you actually opened up alluding
Yeah.
to before, and that is whether or not we have enough revenue coming in order to fund the expenditures in the budget?
That's what we think it should be the first question, of course. We
All
should
right.
first
So
see how much money do we have in our bank, how much money can we actually spend. And that question isn't being asked, because right now the actual governor's budget has a deficit of about $500 million in it. So, we can only do that for so long.
In other words, you're saying the proposed budget expenditures will cost us $500 million more than the revenue coming in.
Correct.
So, yes, where is that $500 million going to come from?
Yeah, that's right now that's being funded by our balance that we have. We have about $800 million in the bank right now. So, and it's very dangerous that if we spend $500 million right now, actually the exact number is $488 million, but let's just round it up to $500 million, so it's easier for us to understand. That will only leaves us with $300 million in the bank, and those fixed costs will continue to increase. So if you look at the 6-year plan that the governor introduced with his budget, we don't see any increases in revenues. Our economy has been growing for 9 years, very strong. We've seen revenue growth for that period of time, but we don't know how much longer our revenues will continue to grow at the current rate.
I have a question. So right now, a lot of this is based on the employee retirement, public pensions, and public health benefits. And it sounds to me that this is unsustainable. Does that mean that in the future there may be, we may have to break promises to public pension worker or public workers?
I don't think, the state under the Constitution is required to make those payments. So if they were to default on it, I think that will be an issue that will go to court for sure. So unless they amend the Constitution,
Which is hard to do.
which is very difficult to do, and it will also be unfair.
So the
to
only
state workers.
way that it can work then is to raise taxes then.
Well, or to cut spending, of course.
All right.
There has to be some kind of balance, and right now there's a clear imbalance. And it's not only us that is saying that. It was actually the Tax Review Commission 2 years ago. They came out and they said that there's a budget deficit on an annual basis of about $300 to $400 million. So there is a gap.
That's right.
And
now
if-
that needs to be funded.
If I'm,
somehow.
let's say that I'm Mayor Billy Keli'i or Ellen Arakawa or someone from the county level, and I'm looking at my county budget.
Yeah.
Is this problem related to me at all, or can I just ignore this problem?
I think it has some impact on the county budgets as well, because the counties are funded by TAT taxes, right? I believe it stands for
Right.
transient
Transient accommodation.
tax. So they're being funded through that tax, and so yeah, I mean, perhaps they're getting a fixed amount. I'm not sure what the exact amount is. I don't have those numbers with me, but it could have an impact on the counties as well, since they rely on those funds.
So they may see their budgets snipped in the future too.
Well, if the state were to change the allocation from the TAT tax revenues to the counties, then they would have to find money elsewhere in their budget.
As you pointed out, Paul, the guarantee is made by our state constitution that the employees will continue to receive their pension payments and their health plan.
Correct.
So we're not looking at jeopardizing that for union retirees, but what we are looking at is the fact that just to catch up with payments, we're taking $1.3 billion away every
Correct.
year for the next 30 years from very needed and vital services.
Correct. And now, I just want to mention that, the state constitution guarantees those payments for current state employees, but future state employees, they could change their policy for future state employees.
That's right.
And I don't think it's very unreasonable right now in the private sector. There's almost no employer anymore in the U.S. that offers a similar plan. So I think for future state employees, the state legislature could look into it and maybe say, well, let's only offer them a pension and let's not offer current state or new state employees. Let's not offer them the benefits that the EUTF offers.
What you've basically done is articulated the fact that there is need for changing the way we look at benefits and payments for our public sector unions.
Correct.
And you've done so not from a political frame of reference, but from a hardline economic frame of reference.
Well, and also me, I look at myself. I've been working at the state senate for the last 4 years. I don't necessarily need that benefit myself. I'm young, and quite frankly, I don't trust that I will get that benefits 30 years from now. So I think for younger folks like me, I think that a lot of people don't really join the state government for those benefits, and I will be okay if
Well,
that
this
were
is
offered to me.
a good point to segue into a break, and when we come back, what I'd like you to do is a little bit of projection work. Let's walk through the next several years, 2016, 2018, and see what the sustainability is for the overall budget. This is Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, hosting today Paul Harleman with the Senate minority, as well as Joe Kent on our team. We're going to be right back after this short message. Don't go away.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Well, we're back in our final segment of Ehana Kako for this week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. You can see all programs for ThinkTech Hawaii on the thinktechhawaii.com website. We also invite you to go to the Grassroots Institute website. That's Grassroots, singular, grassrootsinstitute.org. And there you can find all of our programs of Ehana Kako and a great deal of information about the economy, the government, and society. Back to Paul Harleman. Paul, let's walk into the future now. Based upon your assessment of the state budget, how viable are we as we go from 2016 to 2017 and 18?
Well, I think we're taking a big risk. If the legislature approves the governor's budget, which has a deficit of about $488 million in the state general fund, then we're taking a huge risk. And I think that if that happens and our revenues stay the same, then the state legislature has no other choice but to increase their tax revenues because it's simply not balanced. And a big important item is our state union contracts expired this year, and so the budget will have to go up automatically, and with only $300 million cash on hand, that's not going to cover it. So we're taking a huge risk. We don't know what the future is going to be. Our state economy has been growing steadily for 9 years, but that is a very long period of time. There's all kinds of things that are happening right now. The stock market, for example, has been taking hits. We don't know what will happen in China, and all those things will have an impact on the state budget as well. So we're taking a huge risk.
Well,
we approve this
we say in
budget right
economics, ceteris paribus, all factors equal.
Yeah.
Let's just say we hit 2018. What specifically can we start expecting to be happening if all factors are kept equal?
Not all legislation has been introduced this year yet, but I personally think that there will be some legislation this year asking for increases in our general exercise tax.
And part of the rationale that is argued would be we need that for economic solvency.
Correct. But from our standpoint, that will be very, very bad because we already have the highest cost of living in the U.S., and it's going to affect the individual taxpayers at the lower tax brackets, as well as our business community, because the general exercise tax is being levied upon business-to-business transactions. So what it will do essentially is to increase our prices, and we also have to understand that the minimum wage was increased as well, so that means that the cost of doing business in our state is already increasing because of that, because employers have their people more, and then if we are increasing the general exercise tax, it would just lead to higher prices. And to get back to my other point about individual taxpayers at the lower tax brackets, a 1% increase in general exercise tax in absolute terms amounts to about $350 for individual families that are making less than $33,000 on an annual basis.
And
so
this is what we call a regressive tax. It
the
actually
most
hurts those at
regressive.
the lowest end economically.
In comparison to all 51 states, it's actually the most regressive tax system that we have.
You know, and unfortunately, very few people realize that the general excise tax sales tax is looked to almost like a cash cow, that over half of our state budget is
Correct.
actually generated by this. And so there are countless proposals each legislative session to increase the GE tax.
Correct.
And might it also be true that decreasing the GE tax or decreasing taxes might result in higher revenues for the state?
Potentially, definitely. That's something that they don't look at. The current budget doesn't factor that in, that if we decrease the GET tax, of course, then businesses will have more money to spend, consumers will have more money to spend. So that could increase revenues in other tax areas, such as corporate income
That's right.
tax as well as income tax. So
And there's certain ways of looking at the economy that are not really used in our state, such as what you mentioned there,
Yeah.
decreasing the tax rate, whether it's the GE tax or others, leaving more money in the economy,
Correct.
fueling business and sales as well, and in the end, allowing the state to capture more money through its own tax system.
correct. Of course, the easiest thing for the legislature to do is just to increase the GET, but the fundamental problem that we're seeing is the cost of living. That doesn't help the individual taxpayer at all. We have the highest cost of living in the U.S., and if we are increasing the GE tax, that's only gonna increase the cost of living more.
And it sends a signal to business owners or people who are at the last straw. It says that's it, I'm leaving, and so that's
At
lost.
some point, definitely at some point in time, that's what we're going to see, and as well as the rents, for example. One thing that we don't, I mean, even on our rents, the landowners, the property owners, they have to pay GET tax on it. So we'll even increase our rents, And there's how many? I believe the latest report indicated that there's 19,000 units that the state will have to build. There's people on the waiting list.
That's right.
There's people at the lower income spectrum that are looking for housing, and quite frankly, increasing the GET doesn't help to solve those critical problems.
It's unfortunate that raising the GET has become such a political horse to ride in light of the many good things that are needed. For example, our teachers at the HSTA, as we have mentioned earlier, have proposed increasing educational spending for the sake of the keiki. But what the avenue that they're proposing to fund it is a 1% increase in the GET tax. And it's saddening because there's merit to what they want to take place.
Sure.
And at the same time, we're spending $1.3 billion a year to pay down our debt over the next 30 years.
Yeah.
But the mechanism of raising GET, which has been appealed to for the rail and for so many other things, is really something that's going to harm us. What do you think, Joe, about that, being a former teacher yourself? How do you account for the disconnect between the good that they want to have happen, but a lack of clarity about the bad that the means will cause?
Well, I mean, if you look at public workers and see how many public workers do we have in the state, it's less than 10% of the state are public employee, a part of the public pension system. And so that's less than 10% of the state that could have the potential to cause real problems throughout the whole economy. But right now, maybe and people who are listening, I wonder if they think, oh, those guys on camera, they're just talking about the sky is falling, doom and gloom, and this isn't really going to happen. But as we've seen, it has happened elsewhere. Is that right?
Correct. It has happened elsewhere, and the issues that we have are, they're there. I mean, that money has to be, the $488 million surplus has to be, we can either use our $800 million that we have in the bank to, fund that, or we gotta find some other funding for it.
Now,
but it has to be paid for at the end of the day.
Elsewhere in Detroit, for example, everyone knows Detroit went bankrupt, and now that city has lots of problems, but I don't know if it's coming back. And a lot of this had to do with these public pensions.
Yeah.
Now, in Hawaii, though, it's different because Detroit is a city
Correct.
that could go bankrupt. States can't go bankrupt, though.
Correct. Under the federal law, cities could declare bankruptcy and states can't. And also the state constitution, as we mentioned earlier, the state will have to pay for those benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if they're going to go up in the future, they will have to pay for those benefits. So what will happen is, so technically the state cannot go bankrupt, but they will have to find money, and there's revenues will have to be raised, or and they can find ways of doing that by increasing taxes.
In the
or
few
the economy
minutes-
has to grow.
This has been very fascinating and also saddening, but in the few minutes remaining, let's discuss some potential solutions other than raising taxes. As you've pointed out, the temptation is definitely there to raise taxes, and the momentum for that will be there when we simply can't afford government and its benefits here in Hawaii. But what are some of the solutions other than raising our taxes?
Well, I think if we just cut spending this year, we have $800 million in the bank. That's a large amount of money. If we are conservative with that amount, I think we can weather any storm that we might incur over the next couple of years. So I think if we are just very conservative with that amount and maybe not increase the budget this year, maybe cut some, we have to cut some spending. To my estimates, I think if we cut about $200 million in the budget right now and we are conservative with our spending over time, then I think we don't have to increase taxes at all, because we have that surplus. We just have to be conservative.
What do you think about a measure that Grassroots Institute has been promoting for quite a while now, and that is to privatize more and more of the sectors of government that are
Correct.
expensive, such as the state hospital system, which has begun with some privatization on the island of Maui?
Well, definitely. I mean, currently the state is spending about $100 million in taxpayers' money to fund that. system, and they're operating on an annual deficit of about $150 million. So we're not even funding it fully. So that is definitely one of the areas I think that we will be seeing more bills that will be introduced to look at some of the stuff that happened in Maui, maybe to expand that to other islands
Kauai,
as well, to
the Big
Kauai.
Island, and Oahu as well.
Correct,
definitely.
correct. That's definitely.
I have a question about a potential solution. So right now, all public pensions are under a defined contribution plan, which means that, or excuse me, defined benefit plan, which means that you're guaranteed a certain amount no matter how much you pay into the account, you're guaranteed a certain bonus. But would a solution be to privatize their pension plans, to transfer new hires to a 401k, where
Yeah.
they wouldn't be guaranteed that
That will
public
lower
money?
the cost over time. I think that will make a difference. However, that won't solve the problem for the current debt that we already have, but it
Right.
will, over time, it will solve the problems. Now, getting a measure like that passed, that will mean that the state unions will have less power. It's a very difficult topic, but I think that from a fiscal standpoint, that makes sense.
It's interesting, though. It's a very difficult topic to talk about that wouldn't even solve the problem. It would maybe ultimately, in the long term, it would.
In the long term, it would, yeah.
But not the short term, at
No.
least. Okay.
Well, there's some challenges ahead for us, but there are some tough decisions if we make that could make all the difference in the world. Paul, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Keep up the good work. And Joe, thank you for being with us
Thank you.
today. My guests today have been Paul Harleman, Senate Budget Director here in the state of Hawaii, and Joe Kent, VP of Research and Development at the Grassroots Institute. If you enjoyed watching today, you can find this program and others at the Grassroots Institute website. That's grassrootsinstitute.org. Until next time, on behalf of Ehana Kako and the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, aloha.